I know it when I see it. That's what the United States Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart said back in 1964 when he was unable to provide a legal definition of hardcore pornography. I know it when I see it. Leadership is like that, not the obscenity part, the I can't define it, but I know when I see it part. So what is leadership? Are you a leader? And if so, how so? And if not, why not? If we turn this camera around right now, and instead of me, your face filled the frame, how would you answer? It's not easy. In fact, the 1933 Oxford English Dictionary noted that while the word leadership traced its roots back to 1300, leadership did not appear in writings until the first half of the 19th century. By 1953, some 2,500 academics added works to a growing body of leadership research, and by 1974, leadership research pioneer Ralph Stogdill stated that there are as many definitions of leadership as there are persons who have attempted to define it. Today, a quick Google leadership search returns a cool 4.5 billion results in just 0.74 seconds. Google wanted you to know that last part. So which one of the 4.5 billion perspectives of leadership matches your view? Welcome to Season 4 of Willing to Win, where we'll examine what leadership means, why you need more leaders than ever before, and why it's critical that you join the legion of leaders that are shaping the future of us. Welcome to Willing to Win. If you're willing to think different, willing to work different, willing to change at the speed of now, then you're willing to win. Welcome to Willing to Win. I'm Jeff Kaplan.
And I'm Tara Thomas-Gettman. This is an exciting mini-season we're launching called Leadership.
Yeah, and it's my favorite topic, as you know, because I think that leadership is so misunderstood. There are so many definitions of leadership and what leaders are and do, and a lot of people are just confused about it, and they believe that if they're, just starting out in a job or maybe at the first rung in an organizational ladder, that they don't have a leadership role. And we're here to show you this season that nothing could be further from the truth. There is a greater need for leaders and leadership now than ever before. And we're going to talk a lot about that this coming season and show you why that's the case. But the real thing that I think is important for all of our listeners to know is that many of the jobs and many of the opportunities that existed even a few short years ago will soon disappear. And in their place will be a whole new breed of jobs that require a different set of skills. And that the most important skill you can develop is learning how to learn, so that when something new comes along, a problem that you've never dealt with before, a situation that hasn't existed before, you have the capacity and the capability to help others learn through that process and lead them to finding an answer, a solution, and ultimately creating the kind of performance in that new environment that you had before that change. That's really what it's all about. And it's very, very exciting that we're going to be sharing this and empowering a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't think about leadership very much.
Absolutely. And what you said is spot on. The research is there to back it up, because when we think about being hired for a position, we think about a job that, our parent or grandparent may have done. They could have been in that same role with the same responsibilities, the same sort of tasks, and the checklist to get the job done for decades. It maybe never changed. Maybe they worked an assembly line and they had the same job that over time, some, shifts happened, but they ultimately were still tasked with that role if they never pursued any other opportunities. And we know today, you're being hired for a job where what you do, the way you work, how you engage, all of it could change in a year to 6 months. That's how rapidly some of the technology is evolving, the processes and procedures that we do every day. So you have to think of yourself, like Jeff describes, as a lifelong learner, somebody who's coming into a position knowing, hey, I'm not trapped, I'm not stuck in this. In fact, I could someday assume the leadership role of the person who hired me in the first place. And that happens more than we even, can wrap our brain around when you think about how quickly evolution is happening on the job, and COVID really accelerated that. The statistic that really was striking to me that backs this up is that in the World Economic Forum's 2020 jobs report, so a very current report, it's estimated that by 2025, automation and technological advancements will displace 85 million jobs. So there's that panic, the collective gasp of, oh my gosh, is my job going to be eliminated? Here's the great news. Here's the silver lining. 97 million new jobs will emerge to replace those that are lost. So more jobs are actually going to replace ones that are lost. And the need then for new workers, new skills will surpass the existing situation we're in today, where we already have a shortage.
Yeah, and it creates all sorts of problems for everybody, throughout the entire, pipeline of talent in this country. Even, in education, we've talked about it before. If you're an entering freshman today in college, by the time you graduate, what you learned in the first 3 years probably isn't even applicable to your job anymore. So the real task of a university education at this point is not necessarily the highly specific skills of a particular discipline or function, but instead learning how to learn, as we've mentioned before. And if you can learn how to learn, then you're going to have opportunities, really great opportunities to lead the way, because the organizations you're working for are probably going to be working on something different, or at least working in a different way in short order.
Yeah, so you don't have to be frustrated. You need to be flexible and open to these new opportunities that will present themselves. Years ago, there was an anecdotal story that's been shared across where we live in Midwestern circles in the TV news world. There was a gentleman who was attractive, stereotypically resembled Tom Cruise, was how he was judged by some of his coworkers. And he actually worked at a small town TV station in the Midwest, and when attempting to pursue some on-air work because he wanted to be on camera, he was told by a manager, you'll never work on television. You'll never get that job. And it turned out he had an opportunity when he was on location in New Orleans and connected with the Entertainment Tonight crew. And so many people were all abuzz that, Tom Cruise was in the building. Turns out, he was just a guy from northeastern Iowa. And that was a connection that ended up sparking him to move to California. And he became the very successful longtime co-host of Entertainment Tonight. His name is Mark Steinis. He hails from Iowa. So the point is, we often have desires that go far beyond the scope of that entry-level position or the initial task that we're assigned to do. And it's exciting now that if you're that Mark Steinis, whereas years ago, a manager, a boss could really shut you down and limit your opportunities. Absolutely. Now we know that it will be critical for those in leadership roles to identify and recognize these leadership qualities in people that are currently making, low wages on the totem pole because they're either just starting out or haven't yet assumed all of these great new opportunities that have yet to unfold.
Yeah, and I think I actually saw Mark. I think he was on Oprah. He was jumping on the couch.
Wrong guy. Yeah.
They look like him, but no. In the old days, we see these pictures of people who would tell off their boss. One of your favorite movies is 9 to 5, right? And we cheer at somebody, gathering up the courage to tell a boss that they're wrong or one of their policies isn't working, right? And in those days, there wasn't the chance to absolutely shut that person's future down. You're not going to go anyplace unless you have a great recommendation from the last job. Worst case scenario, you need that, or they could not even give you that, meaning you wouldn't be able to find work, anywhere. But now it's pretty easy to go, okay, it's not, you're going to be that way? Great, I want to go find another job. I'm going to be hired in, a few days. And the channels to advertise myself and to assess and to access new opportunities, they're plentiful. I mean, you go out on the internet, it's not hard to find a job posting, board or a job posting site. And obviously right now, it is definitely a worker's market in terms of going out and trying to find new opportunities. So the bosses don't hold that power anymore.
Absolutely. We're so glad you're joining us for this special mini season of Willing to Win called Leadership, where we're diving deep into the strategies and some of the research that Jeff and our team have been doing for decades to really arm you with what it takes to draw from and be inspired by what already exists and how you can execute it in your life and in your job, but also for the betterment of our community as a whole. So when we come back, we're going to talk more about how sometimes, in Jeff's experience, it just takes that one person to give you permission to say, hey, not only are you capable of leading, but you have what it takes to assume the role. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more about leadership.
Willing to win.
Thanks for staying with Willing to Win. I'm Tara Thomas-Gettman.
And I'm Jeff Kaplan.
And leadership is the topic, not just for today, but for our mini season. So if you don't catch all of this, or you'd like to follow up and apply some of these strategies in your life, there's 3 more episodes that will close out our leadership series. So you can go to our website, willingtowin.org, win.org, to catch this and all of the episodes as we continue to impart a lot of interesting tidbits, if you will, from research and really all the work you've done for decades that you're now trying to cull into life lessons that are simple to understand, but oftentimes difficult for us to execute.
Yeah, I tell you, the whole topic of leadership is incredibly personal to me, because I see so many people, in the world that are told that they're one thing, or they belong in a particular place, or can act a certain way, or only live in a certain, region, or something like that. That there's all these people that are out in the world that have lined up to control you if you let them. And a lot of people that otherwise could, find a way to defend themselves, outthink the situation, and create new opportunities, and just get away from that, poisonous personality that's calling themselves a leader in your life, and go out and start something on your own if they had that courage. And leadership is all about that. And I think what's really important is that leadership is now starting to develop, and the study of leadership is starting to develop to such an extent that more and more people can draw on examples to show them that they indeed are leaders and have a role to play in the development of our future. If you look back really broadly to leadership, the initial interest in it was, hey, this army had a battle with this army, and the prevailing army went on to, rule a certain land for 100 years. How did it happen, right? And obviously, when you start to examine, a clash like that, a human clash, you look to the person that was giving the orders, who was on the big horse riding out, in front of the attack. And we started to examine and think of leaders as just being the one person that was sort of, on the horse, leading the charge, when in fact leadership comes in all sorts of forms. And so as we started to examine that, we thought, well, it's not just the person that's leading on the front horse, but it's all the generals that are there that had to coordinate the various units. It was the specialists who had to learn new ways to use, different instruments and implements, that indeed they practice leadership as well. And without their contribution, that success wouldn't have existed. So we started to ask ourselves, what are the elements of leadership? And then we ask ourselves fundamental questions, like, could a leader be made, or are leaders born? For a while there, we had a lot of people that subscribe to something called the great man theory. The great man theory is the idea that somebody is born with leadership qualities, and one of those qualities is height and size. Because in the animal kingdom, the biggest animal is usually the one that's in charge, right? So if you're big, like if you find yourself, I can't even imagine, but if you find yourself out in the woodlands,
in the wild,
and you're facing a bear, Tara, right? The first thing you're supposed to do, you're supposed to make your arms, bigger, make your size bigger, to you take up more space, because in nature, the bigger animal is going to win in a conflict, right. And so you're looked at as leaders. But does that really make a great leader? It's strange, because Malcolm Gladwell did an analysis of the Fortune 100 organizations and examined their CEOs, and found them, as you might imagine, almost predominantly to the point of almost exclusively male, and the vast majority of them were over 6'3", when less than 3% of the population are over 6'3".
Wow.
So there's something to be said about somebody occupying a physical space, or looking up to somebody when you answer them, and thinking back to when you were a kid, answering your parents, looking up to them. But we all know innately that that's simply not the case. And the great man theory, went by the wayside over the years for a number of reasons. For me, there are two reasons that I dismissed it out of hand. And that is, first of all, more than half of the folks, and I've got a list, more than half of the folks that I've considered great leaders in my life were female. Not great men, but great women. And none of them, not one of them, male or female, would have ever ascribed their success as being wholly from themselves and their leadership abilities, but instead from their ability to galvanize the help and support of others. So as we go on into the future and the world keeps showing us all these new changes and we have to adapt, what are we going to need? We're going to need leaders to help us figure out how to adapt to that future. And I know that's a lot, but I wanted to sort of summarize 2,000 years of leadership study
into a few minutes.
2 minutes.
And it's so important that you shared that, because it seems like common sense, right? That the great man theory, side note, I'm guessing created by a man.
I would think so, yeah.
would not be applicable to the real world and to our lives today. But what we know is there are still those elements of, stereotypes, especially along gender interpretations, that we fall into, and we subject ourselves to this concept of, I don't think that I have what it takes, or I've never been told that I was a natural born leader, or I've never been, a student council president, or I was passed over for some opportunity. In the end, what Jeff is saying seems so simple, yet it's so riveting in that it took years of research to really prove, statistically or scientifically speaking, that leadership can be taught. And there it is, what you can grow from, knowing that you're no different and no one is better because of their, happenstance of birth or financial situation or life breaks or realities that one has amassed over another. The truth is, we all are capable of executing it. So
that's the other thing I want to make sure we actually say. Leadership can be learned, as you said. The second part of what they found, and this is related to some studies that were done by Coons and Posner back in the 90s. It's called the Leadership Challenge. And in it, they said that leadership qualities could be known, that leadership could be learned, and the catch-all is that anyone could learn to lead. I think that's the most important part.
It's so refreshing, because anyone watching or listening, hearing the sound of our voices, they too are not just somebody who's capable of being a leader. They already possess the sort of innate opportunity that it presents itself, should they make the choices to pursue these opportunities.
So let me ask you a question. Like when you were born, you rolled off the assembly line and they gave you a card and said, this is what you're going to be. What did your card say?
It was blank, right? I was hoping that I had so many opportunities that no one was deciding that for me.
You didn't get a card. We give people the right to define us. So we're here today, specifically in this episode, talking about leadership to make sure you know not to be waiting for someone to give you permission to lead. You have that permission, and the only one stopping you is you, and we're here to sort of help you break out of that.
Absolutely. We're going to check in with our correspondent Alyssa Nolte, who has a light look at social media, where we're finding that people across the country, this is resonating with them, giving them that permission to assume a leadership role. Alyssa.
Socialite.
So we talk a lot on Willing to Win about permission to lead, and having that not only permission to lead, but the imperative to lead, to make our environments that we're working in the best they can possibly be, to make sure that everybody we're working with has all the information they need to be successful, so that everyone can have a really positive experience when it comes to work. I was scrolling through my TikTok on the For You page for one too many hours, and I came across a video of a nursing leader who was giving permission to other nurses, nursing leaders, other people who are working in healthcare, who are right on that front lines of healthcare and nurses in their units, and saying, you not only have permission to lead, but you have an imperative. Ignore the fact that there's national issues all over. Ignore the fact that there are things that are outside of your control, and take a look at what you can do in your own unit to make it the very best experience possible.
If you're a nursing leader, then you need to hear this. Stop devaluing yourself. I see too many nursing leaders devalue what they bring to leadership. I know that there are staffing concerns. I know, but you're there in the position to try to fix them and make your unit the best unit that it could be. So stop thinking about how nationally there's a problem and start thinking about what can I do to fix the problems on my unit? How do I engage my staff? How do I lead with conscious leadership, empathy, and compassion? I promise it makes a difference if your nurses feel heard, if your nurses feel seen. Leadership is a skill. Are you developing that skill? So stop devaluing yourself. There's a reason that you have that role. Now go out and do it great.
I love that, because it's so true that we sometimes just need not only to give ourselves permission, but we almost need that validation from somebody who might be an outsider. And in your case, that's what happened when you came into a company and did some work with them. Talk about that.
It's a series of regional hospitals that we worked with, and we were implementing a thing called the New Leadership Challenge Survey, in which we work with the head of the hospital, the management team of the hospital, and created a model of the kind of leadership that they wanted. Because leadership is not one size fits all. The kind of leadership we need in government may be entirely different than the kind of leadership we need to develop a piece of software or to build, a new type of car, right? So we helped them develop this model, and then the individual employees took the New Leadership Challenge survey, which produced what we call Leadership Selfie. It's a picture of their own opinions and values about leadership. And then we superimposed one on the other, right? And so the idea was that every employee would take this, and then instead of doing an annual review, you would actually take your leadership selfie, work with your supervisor, and see the areas where you're not quite up to the leadership standard the organization is aspiring to. And in those areas, and there were a lot of areas where individuals were already exceeded the components of the leadership model that they were shooting for from an organizational standpoint. They already exceeded that. So instead of telling them that they needed to improve in one area and let's do that by next year, instead it's, hey, here's some opportunities for you to improve. And by the way, of the 9 areas that we evaluated, 5 of them you exceed the organizational ideal of leadership. So can you help us by becoming a leader yourself and working with others to help them develop those competencies and thereby grow the whole organization stronger? That's the idea. So we send out this survey to everybody in the hospital, and we got back one unique response, which I will always remember. And that was from a young lady who was a nurse who says, I must have gotten this survey by mistake. Why did you think that you got the survey by mistake? She said, because this survey says it's for leaders and I'm not a leader. And for me, that was crushing, right? That was absolutely crushing. She was, and people like her are, and continue to be the people that the Willing to Win Legion is all about. She was putting herself in a box, and we could remedy that. So I went to talk to her personally and explain to her how we were thinking about leadership, and that indeed she should take this test and this survey and then have this conversation to see what was next. And within just 3 weeks, she was promoted to a nurse supervisor.
Wow.
And then happened to be on the steering committee for all of patient care, and to this day is one of the most amazing contributors at a leadership level, right? Clearly now she's got the title and the everything that goes with it, but it all started with her just believing, oh yeah, I guess I do have permission to lead and call myself a leader. I think it's a great story.
It is such a good story. Thank you for sharing that. And we should point out there is a distinction when it comes to managing versus leading. And sometimes we get caught up in our head the concept of, well, I'm not a manager because I'm not that, high-paid person who's telling everybody what to do. But the fact is, there are leadership qualities that you execute in every position within a company, whether it's entry level or the top of the chain. And so when you look at what the researchers have found, here is a list of the activities, some that are described specific to managing versus leading. Managers are involved with planning, organizing, leading, directing, coordinating, and controlling. In contrast, a leader is executing the ability to be, communicating effectively, motivating, giving feedback, delegating, settling disputes even, and being trustworthy. And I laughed about that, just thinking about the times when you, as a person on a job, might be the conduit to iron out an issue between 2 fellow coworkers, right? You're acting as a leader because you might be settling a dispute that allows for the smooth transition back to renewed and refreshed productivity. So I mean, those are interesting distinctions, because so often you would think in your everyday roles, I'm not leading, but in fact, what research tells us is many of the tasks you do every day, no matter how menial you might think your job is, actually impacts the overall leadership effectiveness of the organization.
Absolutely. Could you read that the list on the manager side here? I think the third or fourth one was what I was.
Planning, organizing, leading.
Leading. So manager leads, right? So that's the very kind of slippery slope problem that we have with leadership. If you look it up in the dictionary, it'll say, a leader is one who leads, or leadership is the act of leading, right? It's like this self-referential definition. And then when you start thinking about leadership and you realize how prevalent it is and how important it is, then the tendency is to go the other way and make everything leadership, right? And just sort of push everything together. So let's be really clear when we're talking about leaders and leadership, what we mean. Managers deal with complexity through the application of process. And I know that sounds really academic, but it's super, super practical and tactical to have in the back of your mind that if you're working on a process that already exists and you're trying to get another 2% of productivity or another 3% of people to act on an offer or something like that, and it's largely something that's existing that you're trying to improve, that's management activity. Leaders are the ones that look out on the horizon. They see that change, is looming everywhere, and they think, by the time change gets here, what do I need to be? Where do I need to be positioned? What capabilities do I need to have so that when that change gets here, it won't hurt me, but in fact, I can use it to my advantage and help my organization excel, whether that's productivity or whatever the objectives are, right? So how do we do that? And that may seem academic too, but let me give you an example that is so basic and anybody that's a parent would get it, right? You go into the hospital on the day that your child is born. You walk into the hospital never having had the experience of being a parent, and everything changes when you see that baby and it's handed and put in your arms the first time. And you look down and you say, oh my goodness, this young lady is going to have a wedding someday. This young lady is going to need to go to college. And so you start putting away money in a fund so when that day comes, when that change that you've seen comes, it's not going to be a bad thing for you. It's something you've planned for. You're going to be able to have what you want on that day. Now that is leading in your own family. That is providing opportunity that didn't exist before and wasn't needed until the day you walked in to the hospital, because guess what? Your whole environment changes. I don't know if you know this or not, Tara, but everything changes when you're a parent.
100%. And I'm still experiencing it.
And you know better than anybody that that's the case, and your priorities, change as well. So I think that's a great example of it. But remember that, managers are the ones dealing with complexity, dealing with what exists, trying to make our systems better. Highly important, highly valuable, but entirely different than leadership.
Absolutely. Thank you for making that clarification, the distinction. We hope you've enjoyed hearing about our basic approach initially to just saying what is leadership and how, even though complex, there are simple ways that you can impact your life and the lives of others by adopting some of these strategies and really unleashing the leadership powers that exist within. This is the first of our 4-episode mini-season, so we will be moving to the podcast and would love for you to catch the rest of the season, willingtowin.org, willing2win.org, or you can watch us through our YouTube channel. And again, let's talk about what's to come so we can sort of tease the leadership lessons that we're going to share throughout this mini season. The first thing, as we said, was today really addressing in this episode, what is leadership? And we want to ask people the question that they can reflect on when they, think back to what we've shared.
Yeah, and this isn't something that you have to get out a piece of paper for or do anything special on. But we just ask you to take a moment after this episode and reflect on your own life and ask yourself, in your own life, as an individual, as a parent, a member of a family, a member of a community, maybe you're involved in politics or you're involved in the spiritual community around you. Ask yourself how are you, acting as a leader in those circumstances? And if you can't find any examples, ask yourself the question, how could I begin to do that by adding more value to help us and those communities be more successful as change, hits. Because the world around us, it is different than 1970. The world around us is changing. Tomorrow will be different than today, that's for sure. And we need to make sure that you're equipped as leaders so that our communities don't suffer, but instead prosper from that change.
Absolutely. Great insight. We're going to examine how our environment, as Jeff described, continues to change, and that how that impacts how we exercise our leadership roles in a subsequent episode, how the information access that we have changes our view, and what we can do with all of that information that's out there that we consume on a daily basis to use it for good when we apply it to our leadership strategies. And finally, we will uncover what experience we're having with leadership and how that, moves us to respond and react differently. But really what you're saying is that in some regard, because we know change is coming, as leaders, we need to anticipate.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a bold new world, and I think that you can fundamentally write your ticket if you understand this. And I have to tell you, a lot of people said that we could never do a TV show about a heady subject, that people, the viewing audience wasn't smart enough or wasn't interested enough. And I fundamentally disagree, because there's so many smart people in our community that we interact with every day. And our belief is that if we just give people the tools they need and the permission to act, they will build amazing things. That's what the Willing to Win Legion is all about. Thanks so much for tuning in this week.
Absolutely. Check us out on social media at Dr. Jeff Kaplan is the tag. You can hashtag W2W Legion, the Willing to Win Legion. Join our conversation.
These episodes are the first reports filed from the front lines of change, where a growing legion of individuals and organizations are discovering what it takes to win and stay winning in a world defined by change and driven by interconnected human networks.
Willing to Win is produced by Lift Productions. Guests on the program are not compensated, nor is their appearance representative of the Willing to Win views. Willing to Win does not necessarily endorse any people, products, or services.